Your weekend is not complete without the First Lady of New York Radio. It's the Joan Hamburg Show. Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Melinda?
I'm good. I'm on Fire Island. How bad can I be?
How bad? Well, New York City is not good today. It's pouring and nasty.
You know, it's overcast here, but...
You didn't get the rain?
We got it last night a little bit, but not so far so good.
Where are you in Fire Island?
I'm in Cherry Grove.
Oh, nice. We used to go there every year, but times have changed.
You know, it's my Fire Island. Every place I go in the world, I compare it to Fire Island because there's really no place like it.
No,
mostly because there's the cars. You know, there are no cars.
I know. Our kids spent their childhoods in Fire Island. So
which town?
We loved it. We lived in Seaview for a long time.
Yes, my kids grew up in Saltaire.
Yeah, well, Saltaire was great too. We always try to follow the tennis courts.
Right.
And do that. Okay, we're going to get started. Okay, how's the book doing?
Well, it came out 2 days ago, so I think it's doing fine. I'm getting fabulous reviews, not just from friends, so that always helps.
All right, no, it was really good. I liked it a lot. It was fascinating to read, and I think it's a book that's going to really help people.
Good.
Anyway, we'll talk about it. We're going to
get rolling. As they say, from your mouth to God's ears.
Okay, let's hope. Okay, we're getting ready to roll.
We're rolling whenever you're ready, okay?
Okay. A lot of times when friends get together and they're of a certain age, we talk about of a certain age, getting through, what it takes. Can you do it? Does it really matter? I read a fascinating book recently by an author I've read before, Melinda Blau, called The Wisdom Whisperers. And the subtitle is Golden Guides to a Long Life of Grit, Grace, and Laughter. Melinda, a writer of many books, articles, books, talks about in all of her work, or a lot of it, relationships, how important they are, what they mean, what they can do for you, and how you can go along your life journey with optimism and with hope. Congratulations, Melinda. You did a great job, and it's a book that a lot of people are going to take advantage of.
Thank you, Joan. First of all, I have to say it's such an honor to be here. I have listened to you for years, and I so respect your interview. So I feel very excited to talk with you.
No, I really enjoyed the book, and I loved reading because so many of us are involved in long-term friendships. I loved reading your thoughts on connection and friendships and unexpected friendships, and how important it is that your friends don't necessarily have to be your peers. They can be people who are considerably older, or in many cases, considerably younger. And you also expose the spirits, free spirits, as people get older. And when you finish this, did you come across for yourself a key to a long life that is full of excitement and adventure and rich in meaning?
Well, I had a couple of surprises, even though I wrote the book and I set out, I set out originally because I had collected this group of much older women. Some of them were 32 years older than me. Of course, now I'm 80 and it's very hard to find 32-year-olds. Right. But they all were ahead of me on the path, and I still have what I call much to my friends' initial dismay, I would call them my old ladies.
Yeah.
And everybody would get very, very angry with me. You can't call them that. That's an insult. I said, when you're 90 or 100, you know
what
you're
are
old.
they? Yeah.
Right. You can't call that young. And I wrote the book because I wanted to share my experience. I didn't set out to say, oh, if I meet these women who are much older than me, they're going to help me age. But that's actually what happened. And because I watched them, it wasn't that I sat at their feet. I didn't think of them as gurus or teachers or even mentors. They were friends who happened to be ahead of me on the path. And life happened to them, and I watched how they dealt with it. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to have the same things happen to me. But as I watched them go through death of spouses and illness and disappointment and all the things that life brings you, both the good and the bad, I said, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And after writing the book, things that surprised me were, first of all, how little things are and little moments are important. You know, we tend to talk about, oh, my daughter's wedding is coming up,
Right.
or I'm getting a raise, and that these are the big moments of life. And they're important moments, but it's the little everyday accomplishments and capabilities and little joys and little encounters with people. It could be, you talked in the beginning about relationships. I always say, if you're good at relationships, you're good at life. Because even the little encounter, you're taking a walk along the beach. I'm at the beach now, so I'm thinking of that. And you stop for 2 minutes to talk to somebody else who has a dog. And in that 2 minutes, there's a little connection and there's information exchanged. And sometimes you say, you know, I'd like to see this person again. Or sometimes you just keep going. But it enriches your life, those little moments.
Right. And you
point
point out that you're not too old to launch a new relationship if it's someone you find interesting or someone you feel you can have a relationship with.
Right. Not only you're not too old, you must. As one of my old ladies, Zelda, who almost made it to 105, used to say to me, honey, well, everybody I know is dead. My family, my best friends, she said, you have to replenish. And she would walk along the ocean, just the way I was describing, or wherever she was walking on the streets, and she'd pick up people. She would call them her conquests. And it was a kind of strange word, but I can see why she, you know, okay, I got another one, you know. And she, I remember at one point, I think she was almost 100, and her children worried because she would take these three. She was very physical. She played tennis till 99.
Wow.
Yeah. And so she would take a 3-mile walk every morning. And her kids were getting concerned. Her kids, of course, were in their 60s. Mom, you shouldn't be walking alone. What if something happens? So one morning she's walking along and she sees, as she describes it, a young woman who she had seen before walking the same path as she did. And she walked up next to her and she said, hi, I'm Zelda. I'm 100. You know, my kids are very worried about me. And she would tell the whole story. And she'd say, do you mind if I walk with you? Well, who could resist that?
Right.
And the thing about Zelda, and the thing that anyone can do, you don't have to be an extrovert. She read. She had great conversations. She listened really well. And she was interesting. So people gravitate toward her. I think all of my old ladies in the book, they were all very different.
Right.
But every one of them had a good sense of humor and sometimes a sarcastic one, but they engaged with people. They were active. They stayed alert. They were in the game. And that's, you can be in a wheelchair and still be in the game, you know, and that's the important thing that I learned. The other thing that I learned, which I got to it near the end of the book, at the end of the book, where I started realizing I was becoming some people's old lady. And instead of being horrified by that, it turns out it's one of the most life-affirming things to have a young person look at you and say, you give me hope about aging. And
That's
then
great.
you want to keep it up. You know?
Right. And I love when you say aging is a series of nexts.
Yes, yes. And that's true, you know. But the thing is, it's not just aging. You start having nexts when you're young. When you're a teenager and if you're a woman, you get your period. Or you're a boy and you start getting facial hair. That's a next. And you start going, oh, what does this mean? But the thing is, when we get older, the next take on a different meaning because we're near what is, you know, until we find a cure for death, we're near the end of our life when we get older. And so the next take on a different meaning. But the truth is, you deal with them the same way. You kind of look at what happened, say you fell, and you use a cane if you need to.
Right.
You get help if you need to. You take the steps that will still allow you to keep going. And that's what, if there was any theme that was in this book, all my old ladies just kept going, and they lived until they died.
Yeah,
there are 9
really
in the
important.
book. Yeah. There are 9 in the book, and 4 of them are still alive. And I'm still on the prowl for old ladies.
Right.
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
And a lot of your old ladies have made new connections, have had unexpected friendships and relationships, and
Right.
are still free spirits, even in an age that many of us would consider like, I don't know, you know, can you be a free spirit at 90-something?
Right.
But yours
right.
can.
Can you learn something new at 90?
Yeah. Amazing.
And it is amazing. I have one woman, I have 2 old ladies in Paris because I spend part of my time, I live part-time in Paris. And one of them is a Holocaust survivor, and she's 96, and she just completed her memoir.
Oh.
And she is as sharp as a tack. And I cherish every email and text I get to her. She's also very technologically savvy, which you don't necessarily find in 96-year-old people. But she's kept herself current. She's had a fascinating life, a very difficult life in the beginning. I mean, she was running from the Nazis when she was a kid, or her family was. They were worried about that. And after the war, she spent some time in the U.S., so she speaks perfect English. My French is not so good, so I need people that speak English. And she's just wonderful. And she greets each day as it's a new beginning. And that's another thing that I saw with all of them. They all continue to plan. You know, I'll never forget years ago, somebody told me about their aging father. He refused to get new clothes because he was 75. Why should I get new clothes? I'm 75. I'm going to die soon. Well, that is first of all, you don't necessarily die at 76.
Right.
And second of all, even if he was, why stop living until, you know, the universe takes you?
Well,
or God, or however you think about it. And that's what I saw in each of my old ladies, that this tremendous drive to be independent. I talk about Marge, who lived to 104 and a quarter. And by the way, Zelda always told me, when you get to be 100, you're allowed to add the quarters, like kids do. So I always add the quarters. And Marge was fiercely independent, but she was also interdependent. She knew who she could rely on, and she knew how to ask help. And that's a really important balance as you get older. And these are things that I wouldn't have realized, even though I was in my 70s when I met Marge, watching her, I said, oh, wow, this is something. I have to pay attention to this. She would plan her own meals. She lived alone until the very end when she had a fall. She had a hip replacement, and then she had to have care around the clock. And I swear she willed herself out of there.
And she did okay.
And I write about that in the book. I write about, the lessons of losing some of them. Because, of course, when you befriend somebody in their 90s, you know that there's an expiration date on the friendship.
Right. And yet you can do it. I mean,
right.
you talk about friendships and unexpected friendships and the connections.
Yeah. And it's such a gift. It's such a gift. And one of the things that I got from my old ladies was to look at, we age from the minute we're born.
Hard to believe, but it's true.
It is hard to believe. But a 10-year-old wishes to be 15 because he wants to, or 17, so he can drive a car. And the 17-year-old imagines what they're going to be like when they're 30. When we stop imagining, in our 50s probably, then we start dreading. And what I'm hoping that this book is going to do is help people embrace the gift of aging, because it is a gift, instead of dreading it.
And did you find, and I'm talking to Melinda Blau about her new book, The Wisdom Whisperers, did you find that as you were getting older, it was harder to make friendships that were really meaningful, to get new connections that would add to your life?
Actually, I haven't found that. And part of the reason for that is I was a shy kid. But over the years, as I've come out and I've met people, the more I meet new people, the more I realize what a benefit it is. And so it's like a virtuous loop. Oh, meet this new person. Sometimes it's nothing more than getting new information or getting a new perspective. And then in 2009, I published a book called Consequential Strangers. And that was about the importance of reaching beyond your family and close friends. And that propelled me even more to start reaching out to strangers and turn them into consequential strangers, to just have a conversation. And some of those consequential strangers became friends. And the difference of the women in my book is they were all much older than me. But I tend to reach up and down the age ladder. And people will often say to me, well, how do you do that? And it's quite simple, actually. You start with being curious about people. If you're genuinely curious and you walk by somebody, having a dog is a great
I think everyone should have one, old or young.
I do too. But even if you don't, I've done this in Paris, and that is not the friendliest place in the world. Mm-hmm. New York is, but Paris is not.
And by the way, what made you decide to live in Paris? Because it is not the friendliest place.
No, I didn't decide at all. My partner is an ambassador, and so and she was offered the job she couldn't refuse. She's from a different country, and she's the ambassador to France. So, what am I going to say?
Yeah,
don't go?
It's irresistible. I'd go too. I don't even know her.
So I live, actually, since the pandemic, I've lived quite a lot there of the year, but I come back to New York a lot because that's really my home. But I've made a lot of friends in Paris, and what I do sometimes if I'm at a corner, now this has to be genuine. You can't just make it up. But if I'm standing next to a very nicely dressed woman, and I like her sneakers because I'm always looking for new sneakers.
Right.
I'll say to her, those are really nice sneakers. And then I hope she understands English. And of course, people say thank you. And then I'll say, where'd you get them or who makes them? If they don't say thank you or they stick their nose up, nothing gained, nothing more. Right, exactly. And I'll do that. I could be sitting in a cafe next to somebody. I could overhear a conversation, and I might say in a very nice way, I couldn't help overhearing, but I'm from the United States also. And we start a conversation. most of the time they don't go any further, but some of those people have become good friends, and it keeps your mind churning. It keeps your imagination open. It gives you windows on new experiences and new perspectives. I went to Roland Garros with two young women who were, I think, 26 and 27. And I said to them at one point, "Do you feel like you're with your grandmother?" They went, "No, you're so cool." Well, that I love that.
I don't blame you.
And when I got there, and we wanted something to eat, they said, "You sit, we'll go get it for you." I said, "Okay." I didn't mind.
No, that's great. And did you find that a lot of your older friends at that time, and even as time goes on now, have discovered in each of their separate lives real meaning into what's going on with them?
Oh, absolutely. All of them were extremely conscious of, they were all very well read the Times usually every day, and they were all open. They were all open till the day they died. They wanted to know more. They believed that there was more to know. So they never said, "I have enough clothes," metaphorically, I mean. And they just didn't give up. So they were very open. And I say in the book that when you have this, I call them May-December relationships, because when there's 32 years or even 20 years between people, it's a lot. It's a generation, at least. And I said the older person gets the respect and the attention. I mean, Zelda loved it when I took notes. I wasn't taking notes because I was necessarily planning to write about her, but I'm a journalist. I know a good phrase when I hear it. And at one point I said to her, "Zelda, do you mind if I take notes?" And she said, "No, of course not. I love that you're that interested." You know, and she said to me, she loves people. And she said, "I love smart people." And she said, "I feel good because you're interested in me." And it feels wonderful to do that for somebody. You know, we all think we have to do something for the old person. You don't have to go take them to lunch. You don't have to do anything. Just talk to them like they're there, that they're visible. And you're surprised sometimes at what you get back. One of the things that surprised me was how open and accepting these women were because earlier in my life, I was fairly closeted about my relationship. I felt it was nobody's business. And one day, Zelda looked at me and she said, "Honey, you're so pretty. How come you never got remarried?" And so it was Zelda. I couldn't lie to her. And I said, "Well, to tell you the truth, I am partnered, and I've been with this woman." At that point, it was probably 20 years. Now it's 31. But I said, "Actually, I'm with a woman." And she doesn't bat an eyelash. Now, this is in the 90s.
Right. And where was this, Paris or America?
No, this was in Florida. Zelda lives in Florida. Right. And she looked at me. She goes, "Really?" She said, "You know, I had a crush on my gym teacher when I was 16.
That's funny.
It was great. It was terrific. And it was the same thing with Henrietta, who I met even earlier. And we became pen pals after, because I moved out of the city and I lived in Massachusetts. And I met Henrietta because she was a writer, and we met in a fiction writing class. And I never wrote fiction after that, but I had Henrietta, and we stayed in touch even after I moved out of the city. And our letters were every time a letter came from Henrietta, I was so excited. You know, like I was getting something from the present.
Right.
And her insights were so incredible. And I remember I wrote a very, very popular, it was a bestseller called Secrets of the Baby Whisperer. And when I was planning the book, I told her about it. And this was a woman who, her husband died when she was in her 60s, but she had been the breadwinner in her family. She was born in 1911. So she was way ahead of her time. There were not a lot of women like this. And she published books, and she published what she called how-to books. And when I told her about the baby whisperer, she said, you're onto something good. She said, because the whispering metaphor, she was 90 when she told me this. The whispering metaphor is very popular. This was when The Horse Whisperer came out.
Yeah.
And of course it was, and she was right. The book was a bestseller. It ended up on the Times bestseller list.
Great.
And I put her name in the acknowledgments, and she was so excited that I did, because she really was cheering me on. And you don't expect this from somebody so much older. You think, oh, what do they know about what's going on? But they do.
Right.
And
it makes a difference.
It makes a huge difference. But the older person needs to be the kind of person who says, I'm not quitting. I'm going to stay in the game. And each one of them was that kind of person. And I also picked each one, which I didn't realize till I actually sat down and write the book. I picked each one because it was something I either need to look at or learn that sometimes I didn't even realize until I wrote the book. So, for example, with Henrietta, she was legally blind and walked with a cane. And when I met her, I was only 46. Aging was not even on my radar.
Right.
But what was my old fear, because I had been very, very nearsighted from the time I was a 5-year-old.
That this would happen to you.
I was always afraid of going blind. And I looked at her and I said, oh, my God, where does this courage come from that she can take the subway? And she had to hold the paper up to practically touching her nose when she read. She could barely see, and she needed a cane. But that didn't stop her. And so she was my first old lady. It made me say, wait a minute, there's something I need to pay attention to. Because honestly, I was as ageist as the next person at that point when I met her. And I walked into that room, and there were a lot of old people in that class. And I said to myself, silently, of course, oh no, a room full of old people. You know, what am I doing here?
Right. Well, that was not an unusual reaction.
Unfortunately, it's still not. That was 89. And unfortunately, it's so entrenched, ageism, that people don't even realize it. And that's what I also hope that this book will conquer. It will help people, because even for myself, I remember when my daughter was pregnant with her first child, and I was just almost 60. And I said, well, I have to find another name. No one's calling me Grandma. Well, that's ageist. But it took me years to realize how ageist it was.
Right.
You know, and it's very funny because my middle grandson picked up on it. And he knew by the time he was 3 or 4 that I didn't like to be called Grandma. Yeah. And I would come to the house and he'd go, hi, Grandma.
What did he end up calling you?
No, he teases me still with Grandma, but my grandma name is Minna.
Okay.
Which was sort of my mother when I was little called me Minda.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the funny thing was, when I started going to Florida, I met an old woman in the elevator whose name was Minna. And in the book I say, who was I kidding myself? No matter what name I gave myself, I had grandchildren, I was getting older. Who was I kidding?
Did you find, Melinda, that there was a difference in attitude between France and the States?
You know, I have always said that in France it's okay to be old and not so much in the United States. But unfortunately, my French friends, and I have very few actual French friends because unless they speak English, my French friends tell me it's changing. Which is sad, but, you know, that's because everything is so globalized now because of the Internet that, you know, you're getting the same messages all over.
Right.
So I'm not sure it's any better. I think the places it's better. You know, they talk about the blue zones. And I think in places where elders are revered, in cultures where elders are revered, you don't find it as much. But even that, young people sometimes say, well, what do we, well, you heard it in the politics. What do we need these old people for? And you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
It's a very bad metaphor to use for that. But there's something to be said for youth, and there's something to be said for aging. And that's why I have friends on both ends of the age continuum, because it's important to stay current, and to be with old people. It's important to be able to look ahead and not fear whatever is ahead. So I think that, it does come down again to relationships.
Yeah.
And the good thing is, you're not born being good at relationships. It's something that you can develop, and you can develop it at any age if it means enough to you to develop it. So even if you find yourself, you've just moved into an assisted living place, and I know this from people who have moved in.
Is that a good thing, do you find, from your friends who have done that?
I'll tell you, the ones who have done that, who have been most successful, are the ones who have chosen it themselves. And they've done it proactively. It's not a good thing if your kids put you there.
Right. It's like put grandma away.
Exactly. And often the older person will say, well, my kids want it, and they'll sort of resign. And that's not a good thing. There's lots of options for living as one ages, and it depends on your situation. Sometimes that's the only possibility. Of course, if you have cognitive issues, especially severe cognitive issues, you may need to be in a place to be safe. Yeah, and that, by the way, is the one thing that I'm afraid of. In terms of, I think I could probably handle anything else that comes my way, having watched my old ladies go through it. But the one thing where all bets are off is if you can't make
you
your
start losing it.
Yeah. And so you just hope it's the luck of the draw. I mean, I say this constantly in the book when I talk about the next. Nobody knows what's around the corner. Nobody knows what part is going to start breaking down, whether your mind is going to start going, whether, you walk across the street and trip and fall flat on your face. You just don't know. So you just have to sort of prepare yourself for whatever is going to happen to you.
Just get up and keep going.
Get up and keep going. And if you have to get up with help, get up with help, And so it's been such an educational experience for me, not just to have these friendships. That was the beginning. And I talked about the book for a good 10 or 15 years before I actually sat down to write it. And when I finally sat down to write it, I realized this is also my story, because the reason, as I pointed out before, the reason I picked each of these ladies was what I was going through at the time. And in retrospect, it was really mind-boggling to write it, because I kind of got to see my own life in my own last 80 years and how I got here.
Right.
And it's been an exhilarating experience. And I think that there's enough in the book that it will really can help people change their attitudes about aging.
Right.
And I keep saying it's not a book about aging, it's a book about living.
Well, I think that's a good analysis. And it's also, you're never really too old, you'll find out, to have a new relationship or look beyond where you are and
absolutely
relish everything. Thank you, Melinda. Good job, Melinda Blau, the Wisdom Whisperers, golden guides to a long life of grit, grace, and laughter. Congratulations. I look forward to talking to you again. I'm Joan Hamburg.
I just want to say one thing. On August 14th, the Crow's Feet podcast is featuring me as an interview and reading from the book.
Very good.
So people can get a preview. It's on every place you have podcasts. It's Crow's Feet, Life as We Age.
Okay, sounds good. Continued success. We'll talk again.
Thank you so much, Joan.
You're welcome.
Bye.
I'm Joan Hamburg, and you're listening to WABC. More ahead.